husband passed on a Tuesday in November, and by the following Monday I was back at work. People thought that was strange. My daughter called me 3 times that week trying to talk me out of it. But I had been a legal secretary for 31 years, and sitting in that house in Orangeville with nothing but the sound of the radiator clicking and his reading glasses still folded on the side table, I could not do it. I needed somewhere to be. The firm was downtown Toronto, on King Street. I took the GO train in every morning and the last express back at night, usually around 10:30. It was a long commute, but I had done it for years, and the routine felt like a rope to hold on to. Platform, train, office, train, platform, home. One foot, then the other. The night I met the man I'll call my driver, I had missed the last GO back to Orangeville. 43 minutes standing in the cold waiting for a cab that never came, and then I gave up and opened the app on my phone. My daughter had made me download it 6 months before. I had never used it until that night. He pulled up in a clean grey sedan. Quiet man, maybe early 50s, dark coat, NPR on low. He confirmed my name without making a production of it, and we pulled into traffic without much ceremony. Something about that suited me fine. I noticed he drove carefully, not nervously, carefully. He checked his mirrors without being obvious about it, and he didn't talk just to fill the silence the way some people feel they have to. I was in the back seat with a headache pressing behind my eyes, and a contract brief I hadn't finished reading, and I was grateful for the quiet. About 40 minutes out, somewhere past Brampton, he asked if I minded if he stopped for gas. I said of course not. He pulled into a Petro-Canada on the edge of a strip mall and went in to pay, and I sat there in the warmth and watched the lights of the plaza wobbling in the cold November rain. There was a Tim Hortons at the far end, still lit up, nearly empty. When he came back, I asked if he wanted coffee. He looked a little surprised. I told him it was late, and I had a long way to go, and he had an even longer drive back. He said he'd take a tea if it wasn't too much trouble. I walked across that parking lot in the rain, and I bought 2 teas and a package of those shortbread cookies they used to sell at Christmas. It cost me $4 and something. I don't know why I did it, honestly. I think I was just tired of sitting with my own thoughts. He thanked me. I said it was nothing. We drove the rest of the way, and he dropped me at the end of my street just before midnight. That should have been the end of it. A one-time thing, a long night, a cup of tea, but I requested him again the following week. And the week after that. My name is Norma, by the way. I should have said that at the beginning. Norma Elaine Whitfield, 64 years old, retired legal secretary as of last April, though at the time of this story I was still very much working and very much trying to convince myself I was fine. His name, I learned over the following weeks, was Bernard. He had come to Canada from Trinidad in the early 90s, worked for 20 years in logistics, and had been doing rideshare driving in the evenings since his company downsized the year before. He had a daughter in Mississauga and a son who was studying engineering at McMaster. He kept a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror and a small laminated photo of someone tucked into the visor. I never asked who it was. I started bringing tea every Thursday. That was my late night, when I stayed to finish anything that had piled up during the week. I would stop at the Tim Hortons near the office and bring 2 cups out to the car. He always had his music on low. We talked sometimes, and sometimes we didn't. I told him about my husband once briefly, and he listened the way people used to listen before everyone felt the need to immediately offer a response. He just let it sit there. That meant more than he knew. My husband and I had been married for 38 years. We had a daughter together, Elaine. She's named for my middle name, who lives in Guelph with her husband and their 2 little ones. My husband had been a high school shop teacher his whole career. He drove a 10-year-old truck, coached junior hockey on weekends, made the best roast chicken I have ever tasted, and then one morning in early October, he said his left arm felt strange, and he was gone by lunch. That is how fast it happens. 38 years and then lunch. I kept working because stopping meant accepting it. That is the only honest way I can explain it. The Thursday nights continued through January and into February. There was a February ice storm that I still remember because Bernard drove like he was carrying something delicate, and we talked the whole way about whether City ever actually learned to prepare for winter or just kept acting surprised by it every year. He thought the highway maintenance was better out west. I said I wouldn't know. I had never lived anywhere but Ontario. He laughed. He didn't laugh often, but when he did it was genuine, the kind that reaches the eyes. I am telling you all of this so that you understand what I am about to say was not random. It did not come out of nowhere. It came from 5 months of the same car, the same route, the same man who knew approximately what kind of night I'd had just from the way I closed the car door. It was a Thursday in the last week of March. I came down from the office at 10:45 with my work bag and my coat, only half buttoned because the elevator had taken forever and I was rushing. Bernard was already there, engine running. I got in, set down my tea, both cups as usual, and we pulled away from King Street into traffic. We were about 20 minutes out, just past the 427, when he did something he had never done before. He took the Dixie Road exit instead of staying on the highway. I looked up from my phone. I didn't say anything immediately. I watched him take the exit and merge south, and I thought perhaps there was construction I hadn't heard about, a closure on the 410 that would send us down through the surface streets. But then he passed Burnhamthorpe and kept going south instead of cutting back east, and something very quiet shifted in my chest. I said his name. Bernard. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His expression was careful. That was the word for it. Careful, the same way he drove. He said, "I need you to stay with me for a little while longer tonight. I need to show you something. Can you trust me for a few more minutes?" I should tell you what ran through my mind in that moment, because I know what it sounds like when I describe it now. A woman alone, late at night, a man who has changed the route without explanation. I know exactly what it sounds like. And I'll be honest, there was a second, maybe two, where my hand moved toward my phone. But this was Bernard, and I had learned over 5 months what it feels like when someone means you harm, and what it feels like when someone is trying to protect you. Those are not the same face. They are not the same hands on a steering wheel. I said, "Tell me what's happening." He didn't answer right away. He turned into a Tim Hortons parking lot, a different one I didn't recognize, and he put the car in park, and he turned around to face me properly. He said he needed to tell me something he had seen, and he needed me to hear it without panicking. I told him I was 64 years old, and I had been a legal secretary for 3 decades, and I had sat across tables from men who thought I would panic, and I had never once given them the satisfaction. He almost smiled at that. Then he told me, for the past 3 weeks, he said, there had been a dark green SUV that waited on my street on Thursday nights. The first time he noticed it, he didn't think anything of it. The second time, he took down the plate. The third time, 2 nights ago, he had done a different shift for a colleague and happened to drive past my street just after midnight. The SUV was there again. Parked half a block up, no lights, engine off. I sat very still. He said the vehicle was registered to a man named Gary Fenton, and then he paused, and he asked me carefully if that name meant anything to me. It did. Gary Fenton had been a property lawyer at a firm I had worked with indirectly years ago, before I joined my current firm. We had dealt with the same clients on a land transfer that had gone badly, a rural property in Grey County, a dispute over boundaries and mineral rights that had dragged through the courts for nearly 4 years. Gary had been the opposing side's counsel. He had not behaved well. There had been complaints filed, nothing that went anywhere. Because complaints filed against lawyers very rarely go anywhere in this province, but it had been unpleasant. That case had ended 14 months ago. I had assumed it was over. I asked Bernard how he had found out whose vehicle it was. He said his son McMaster had a friend in the campus security program who had access to provincial vehicle registrations for training purposes. He had asked the young man to look it up as a favor. He said he knew that wasn't entirely above board, and he was sorry, but he needed to know if I was in danger before he said anything, because he didn't want to frighten me over nothing. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the shortbread cookies in November. I thought about the ice storm in February. I thought about the 38 years and the empty house and the reading glasses still on the side table. I said, "What else?" He said 2 weeks ago on a Thursday night after he had dropped me off, he had circled back, something he said he had started doing after the second time he saw the SUV, and he had watched from the end of the street. He had seen the man get out and walk toward my house, not to the door, around the side, toward the back. I could hear my own heartbeat. I said, "Did he go inside?" Bernard said no. He had waited and watched, and eventually the man had come back to the SUV and driven away, but he had been back there for 11 minutes. Bernard had timed it. I called my daughter that night from the Tim Hortons parking lot. She was not happy that I had waited 3 weeks to find out, which was not entirely fair since I had only found out 4 minutes earlier. But she came down to get me, and I did not go home that night. What followed was not quick or simple. I want to be honest about that because people often imagine these things resolve themselves in a clean way, and they don't. I went to the police the next morning. The officer I spoke to was polite and took notes, and I could see in his face the very careful expression of someone managing my expectations. "A vehicle parked on a public street," he said. "A man who had walked behind a private residence but had not entered it. Without more, there wasn't a great deal they could do tonight," he said. Tonight. As though tonight were the only night that mattered. I had been a legal secretary for 31 years. I knew how this worked. I called my old supervising partner at the firm, a woman who had been practicing for 40 years and who had very little patience for procedural niceties when someone she knew was frightened. She made 3 phone calls that afternoon. By the end of the week, there was a restraining order application filed, and Gary Fenton had been formally notified. It came out later, through the process, that he had been building a grievance for over a year. The land transfer dispute had cost his clients a significant settlement, and they had blamed him, and somewhere in his accounting of that disaster, I had become central to it. I had been the one who had found the documentation that unraveled his argument. I was told later by the firm's counsel that he had been tracking my commute schedule for at least 2 months. He did not contest the restraining order. I was told by my partner that his own firm had become involved at that point, quietly, and that certain professional matters were being reviewed. He resigned from his practice in June. I was not told the details, and I did not ask for them. I had no wish to know more about him than I already did. What I want to tell you about is what happened after. My daughter wanted me to stop the late nights immediately. I understood why. But I did not stop them right away, and that is not because I am stubborn. Although Elaine would dispute that, it is because stopping felt like letting him take something from me. The Thursday nights had been mine long before Gary Fenton made them his. I was not going to surrender them. What I changed was this. I started meeting Bernard in the building lobby instead of on the street. I texted when I was leaving the elevator. Small adjustments, practical ones. A few weeks after the restraining order was in place on a Thursday night in May, we stopped at the Tim Hortons near my house, my usual one, the one I knew, and I bought the teas and I asked him something I had been holding for a while. I asked him why he had come back to check on me that first night, after he dropped me off and circled around. Why he had done that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that the first time he had noticed the green SUV, his daughter had just called to tell him she'd been followed home from work one evening. She was fine. Nothing had happened. A colleague had walked her to her building, but he'd spent that night sick with worry for her, going over all the ways he hadn't been able to protect her from across the city. He said when he saw the SUV the second time on my street, he thought of his daughter, and he thought of me in that house alone, and the reading glasses I had mentioned once. I was surprised he had remembered that, and he made a decision. I did not say anything for a while. I want to tell you what kindness actually costs, because people say it costs nothing, and I used to believe that. I think what they mean is that it costs nothing to be polite, to say good morning, to hold a door, and that is true, but the kind of kindness Bernard showed me, driving back around after a long shift to check on a woman he barely knew, going to the trouble of finding out whose car it was, sitting with what he knew for weeks before he was sure he had enough to tell me without just frightening me. That costs something. It costs time and energy and the willingness to get involved in something that isn't your problem. He chose to make it his problem because of his daughter and a memory of reading glasses on a side table and 5 months of Thursday nights. In June, Bernard's son graduated from McMaster with his engineering degree. Bernard mentioned it quietly the week before, in the way he mentioned most things. I sent the young man a card and a gift card for a bookshop, the kind of thing I would have sent my own nephew. It felt like the right proportion. We still do the Thursday nights. I still bring 2 teas. He still drives carefully and checks his mirrors, and we still talk sometimes and sometimes we don't. This past winter I finally put away my husband's reading glasses. I kept them in a small box in the kitchen drawer, which is perhaps not a traditional place for grief, but it's where they landed, and they stayed there for 2 years. And now they're in the box, and the box is on the shelf in the closet, and that feels like the right distance. I am 66 now. I retired from the firm last April, as I said. The Thursday nights are different now. Sometimes it's just an evening in the city, a gallery opening, dinner with my partner, the friend of my old supervising partner actually, which is a story for another time. But I still request Bernard when I need a late ride, and he still comes, and there is still tea. I told him once that I thought the tea was what had done it, that the whole thing, the noticing, the circling back, the protecting, had come down to a $4 cup of tea on a rainy night in November. He said no. He said it wasn't the tea. He said it was that I hadn't had to think about it, that I had just done it, without weighing whether he deserved it, or whether it was sensible, or whether there was something in it for me. He said that kind of thing shows, over time. People notice. Not always consciously, but they notice. I think about that often. My daughter still worries about me, which is her right and probably her inheritance. I worried about my mother until the day she died at 88, sharp as she'd ever been. I tell Elaine what I tell myself: be careful, be sensible, pay attention to what's in front of you, and be decent to people. Not because it will save your life, though sometimes it does, but because the world is long and cold, and the distance between being seen and being invisible is often just a cup of something warm, handed over without a second thought, on a rainy night when you both needed it. I think about that November parking lot more than I expected to. The rain on the Petro-Canada windows, the 2 teas going cold in my hands, the way I almost didn't buy them. Almost talked myself out of it because it was late and I was tired. And what was the point? That's the thing about small decisions. They don't feel like decisions at the time. What Bernard did for me, driving back around after his shift, writing down a plate number, sitting quietly with what he knew until he was sure, that didn't come from nowhere. I've thought about this carefully, the way you do when something frightening has passed, and you finally have the distance to look at it straight. There is a kind of logic to how it unfolded, even if it took me a while to see it. I had treated him like a person worth noticing. He noticed me back, not out of obligation, not because there was anything in it for him, but because that is what decent people do when they've been treated decently. That exchange, quiet, unspoken, built over 5 months of Thursday nights, is what kept me safe. I don't say that lightly, but I also want to be honest about the other side of it, because I think it matters. Bernard didn't just have a good heart. He had a sharp one. He had a sharp one. He paid attention. He knew the difference between a car that belonged on a street and one that was waiting. He thought before he spoke, weeks before he spoke, because he understood that telling a woman she might be in danger is not something you do carelessly. That kind of clear-headedness, that patience, is its own form of strength. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but it is the thing that made the difference between a warning that helped and a panic that didn't. And then there's what came after. I could have gone home the next morning and waited to see what happened. I could have let the police officers' carefully managed expectations be the end of it. I have known women who did that, who were told there wasn't enough and believed it, and waited and paid for the waiting. I chose not to. I called the person I trusted. I used what I knew. I pushed. That took something. I won't pretend it didn't. There were mornings that winter when it would have been easier to let it go, to tell myself I had been imagining things, that it wasn't worth the trouble. Getting up and continuing anyway, that is a choice you make over and over, not just once. What I came away with, after all of it, is something I find difficult to explain without sounding like a greeting card. So I'll just say it plainly. The tea cost $4. The habit cost me nothing but a few minutes each week, and the decision to treat someone as worth the bother. And from that grew something that, on one Thursday night in March, on the wrong side of the 427, kept me from walking into something I might not have walked back out of. I'm not telling you this so you'll start handing out hot drinks to strangers. I'm telling you because I think we underestimate what it costs to really pay attention to the people around us, and what it gives back in ways we can't predict and usually won't see coming. Norma is still here. Bernard's son is an engineer, and the reading glasses are in a box on the closet shelf, which is exactly where they should be.